So Project Blue, or whatever we're going to be calling it, lies in a bit of an interesting space, right? It has significantly more opportunity for expressing hero identity as opposed to Commoner, but it lacks those big booms that define many decks within Standard Constructed. So from a deck building standpoint, what's the right approach? Does one take a Standard Constructed deck and kind of dumb it down, so to speak, or do we start from the ground up, essentially upskilling a Commoner build? You're watching Budget Format Fab on Dice Commando, your BFF for all things in budget flesh and blood. Coming to you midweek each week, these videos are possible thanks to the support of our channel members. If you want to get involved with the channel and join us on our community Discord, please consider joining as a member. You can be our BFF and show your support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving a comment. Community first, and go Commando. Hey there, my BFFs. Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for some budget content today. Budget Format Fab coming to you midweek every week. And today I want to talk Project Blue specifically around kind of our approach to deck building within this relatively new format. Now, to get there, I do want to talk a bit about the difference between CC, or I should say constructed, Blitz, right? Not just CC, but constructed, and Commoner, and how those deck building approaches are very, very, very different, and how Project Blue kind of lies in this like nebulous space in the middle, and how I think ultimately we have to approach it very differently based on our win con, okay? So to put this in context, I mean, we all understand, deck lists from standard. Well, I don't know that we all understand, to be fair, but deck lists from Standard Constructed, they have access to the entire card pool. So if a hero, for example, has specializations or the Majestics, honestly, that tends to be where people start their builds at, right? You're like, oh, well, there's this big Majestic that's got my hero's name on it. Maybe that's part of the way my hero wants to play. Kind of somewhere in there, and you start with it, and generally there's a theme around it, like, you look at the new Arachnes out of the Hunted, and like you had the Daggers package, the Kiss of Death, and Tarantula Toxin, right, all that stuff, but they're all imps, right? But it kind of defines that. Now, when we move to Commoner, you have a very, very different approach, because you not only do not have the L's, not only do you not have the M's, but more importantly in Commoner, you don't have the rares, right? So there's a lot of heroes very impacted by that. So in general, in Commoner, you don't say, oh, what's the latest Gravy Bones list look like, and let's just take out the M's, right? That's not the way it's going to work in Commoner. You have to start from a very bottom-up thing. And that's why a lot of times, you end up on an Aria. You end up on a lot of just value-focused builds. In Commoner, you see a lot of the same cards over and over again in terms of the generics, right? Which a lot of those are not present in Project Blue for, I think, that very reason. But it's been a very, very different approach. And you rarely go into building a Commoner deck saying, what's the latest, meta deck look like? You very rarely do that. And I'm talking in terms of Standard Constructed. You very rarely look at like, oh, what's the big deck look like? I'm going to build my Commoner, right? You get it. Okay. But like I said, Project Blue starts in the middle. So I think how we have to approach this, and I do acquiesce that from a certain point of view, this is going to be on a hero by hero basis, right? But to start out, you have to ask yourself, how do I win the game, right? What's my thing? What's my shtick? And this is where, admittedly, a lot of times for me, things stop, right? Even within Commoner, I mean, I've been doing Commoner lists for like 2.5 years at this point. If you want to make new content, you got to go into new heroes. And sometimes when I'm starting to do them, I start building the deck, and then I just get, stuck's not the right word, but I just stop, because I'm like, if I want to play, I want to play this hero, but then like halfway through, you're like, this is just functionally worse than this other hero, because I'm trying to do the same thing, or I should rephrase, I'm only able to do the same thing, right? And you're like, well, why would I play Zen in Commoner when he's just basically doing everything that Ira would do, but worse, right? Because he doesn't have access to Chase the Tail and stuff like that, right? So it kind of leads to this question of, if you start at the top, can I execute my same game plan less efficiently, or do I really have to develop a new one entirely, right? So again, if we go look at Ira, was probably the poster child for budget formats, right? Let's be honest. if you go look at what she, there's 1,000,001 different Ira builds out there from in between Blitz over the years and CC right now. Heck, there's the, whatever, you get it. Lots of different things you can do with Ira. But functionally, she kind of just comes at you with like 2 or 3 attacks, maybe some disruption on there, or maybe she's trying to go 4 wide with on hits and just value you, right? So with her, honestly, Ira's maybe not the perfect example of this because she just kind of builds herself and you're just like, all right, I don't have CNC, now I have Wreck Havoc. Okay, I don't have Wreck Havoc, let's go with Sirens or whatever it may be, right? But Ira, she's doing functionally the same thing. So you can, in theory, minus like a dual threat build or something like that, right? You can, in theory, just kind of like dumb it down and try and find the best value replacements you can. But then let's go look at someone like, let's say a Syndra, okay? Syndra, without having, and I'm talking Project Blue right now, right? I mean, it applies to Commoner too. But without Flick Knives, Syndra's pretty rough, right? So you are not going to be able to do the same thing with Syndra in the budget formats that you're doing in a standard constructed deck, right? Regardless of format. You just can't do it without Flick Knives. Like what's her thing, right? So you have to play her, you have to acknowledge that you're going to build her in a very different way. So in that case, you probably flip to a from the bottom up type example. Now, Bravo's kind of another one who lives in value territory from a certain point of view, right? But without his big crushes that he has in standard, he leads into either like a value hammer build or like my pump thump build, who, like, again, I acknowledge in the budget formats, I think Betsy actually does that better right now. Not Valda so much. I've been having troubles figuring Valda out in budget, just why I haven't seen a video of that yet, but I'm working on it. But again, you're not going, you don't have Crippling and Starstruck. You don't even really have, not even really, you don't have stuff like Spinal Crush. So you really have to go, again, you have to really take a step back in that case and say, okay, like, how am I going to win? And if the answer is just value, then I think you have to go bottom up. And then you run into someone like, Boltyn. We've talked about Boltyn and his trouble in budget formats for years. Like, if you really go look at Boltyn, like, basically all the stuff that makes Boltyn do Boltyn things is IMS, right? Including, obviously, Raiden. Now, in Project Blue, you get via the Vanguard, which is great. I mean, it's a huge improvement over Commoner. But just because you have via the Vanguard doesn't mean you can suddenly start doing constructed things, standard constructed things, because you don't have Raiden, right? I guess you could do Centauri's, but you don't have Lumina. I think you probably play Hatchets with him. I think's the thing. But either way, right, you can't do the same thing, so you really have to start at ground up. On the other hand, though, you have a couple of heroes out there, specifically ones I'm excited about, like Kayo and Fang. Okay, so both of these guys are basically just straight conversion heroes. Certainly when you can basically go look at a standard constructed list and just dumb them down pretty easily. Right, like Kayo, you go look at a Blitz Kayo deck, because it's skirmish season when I'm shooting this, go look at a Blitz Kayo deck, and anything that's an M, you just go find an equivalent rare. Like, it's not hard. And in many cases, the equivalent's actually a common. Not hard at all. Fang, you go look at him, like, what is he really missing out on? There's Saber. I mean, again, it's loss of value, loss of explosivity, loss of crazy things, right? But he's got, Long Whisker Loyalty, right, is his thing, where you can get the multi-shot. Saber Bloodshed has plenty, especially in Project Blue, has plenty of 0-4 pump backfills. Yes, you're not drawing a card, I get it. But you've got the one that you can see their hand, and if they hit a react, then you get a mark. Like, that's pretty good. I mean, some people are playing that in Constructed anyway, but that's a very equal backfill, right? So, and then what's his 0-4, I always forget the name of, but it's his 0-4. If you have 3 loyalties, you can play it, but it's a 0-4 Draconic Pump reaction, which is really good for him. But again, all of those have very, very, very equivalent backfills. So in that case, again, how am I going to win the game? What's my shtick? They're basically doing the same thing. Okay. Now, where it gets kind of I'm not going to say confusing, but where it gets debatable on the back and forth is the heroes that fall into that too much good stuff type range. And I will actually acquiesce that Aria might actually fall into the too much good stuff range where there's just so many options. So fair enough on the Aria argument. But if you look at someone like, let's say, Briar or Aurora, who I'm looking very heavily at right now, I love both of them. Like, they just have so much good stuff. I mean, they're good in Commoner, or I should say they're okay in Commoner. But now they've got Snatch on. How is Snatch legal, by the way? Snatch so good without the D-Reacts, I mean. But they've got all that stuff, tons of Lightning cards, tons of Earth cards. It's almost like you try and build the deck and you're like, oh, like suddenly find yourself like, in Commoner, when you're doing building, a lot of times you'll find yourself at like 28-ish cards or something on like let me just go, let me go put in all the blue 6s for Bravo and like build, and then you kind of build it out, Sync and Fate, and you're like 28, 30 cards, right? When I do the same type of activity for someone like Aurora, Briar, or even Chane to a lesser degree, Chane is, there's a lot of pressure on Chane within blue in terms of what they've targeted, which is completely fine. But you go start looking at that and like, most of the time you have to cut cards, and you even get extra space in Project Blue, right? Now that should be used for sideboard tech. We all get it. But man, it's a great problem to have. So with them, I think on the too much good stuff type build, you really start bottom up from that perspective, because what you want is to be able to be fat and then cut down and say, this is less efficient than this is less efficient than this. This is what I'm trying to do from a combo perspective. And again, I use that term loosely because both Aurora and Briar, they're not really combo-ing, right? They're just trying to synergize. That's probably a better word, is the synergize. Okay. So where I find blue to be very interesting is I don't think there is a right answer necessarily from the architecture standpoint in terms of like, you should just go take a CC build and make it dumb, or a Blitz build as it may be, right? You should go take a Blitz build and make it dumber. You should go take a Commoner build and make it better. I don't think there's a one size fits all for blue because of just the rarity differences, right? When you're looking at top to bottom of standard constructed to Commoner, it's such a wide range that you really have to start from scratch. But depending on the hero, depending on the build, you might just be able to swap out, like in the Kayo example, just go swap out things that are just ever so slightly worse, ship the deck, and roll into your armory. So anyway, that's kind of my take on this today, is ask yourself, how do I win the game? What's my thing? And what do I need to do to get there? And if what I need to do to get there is the same thing as I can do in standard constructed, albeit less efficiently, copy that and dumb it down. That's my take. Thanks for joining, and go Commando.